It happened late one evening when I was driving home from university. The road led through a suburban area, almost deserted at that time. It was drizzling, and the drops were beating a rhythm on the hood of my car. I was already mentally imagining how I would get home, when red and blue lights flashed behind me. A police car. I was wary. I had not broken the rules. But to avoid trouble, I turned on the turn signal, slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The policeman got out of the car, pulling his cap down so that his face was almost invisible. He knocked on the glass, and I rolled down the window. "Good evening, sir. Your license and registration, please," he said in a dry but authoritative tone. I handed him the documents, but something in his demeanor made me wary. His uniform looked sloppy, and the badge seemed to be hanging oddly. While he was looking at my papers, I noticed that his car had no license plates or identification marks. "Did you know that your taillight is faulty?" he asked. "What, faulty?" I was sure that everything was working, because I had recently checked the car. "Please get out of the car." The anxiety inside me grew. His tone became harsher, and his gaze became more insistent. I tried to ask him a question. "Excuse me, can I see your badge?" The policeman paused for a second, then said sharply, "This is a routine check. If you interfere with the police, it will only make things worse for you." I felt a cold sweat running down my back. It was impossible to pretend that nothing was happening. I decided to stall for time and carefully picked up the phone. But when I turned on the screen, the officer noticed it. "What are you doing? Put the phone down." He took out his gun and pointed it at me. That was the moment I realized the situation was out of control. "Calm down," I said, trying not to show my fear. "I just wanted to show you my papers. Get out." Now, he raised his voice, and I noticed his hands were shaking. I didn't want to obey, but arguing with an armed man was dangerous. Instead, I pretended to open the door, but slammed my foot on the gas pedal, causing the car to take off. A shot rang out behind me, but fortunately the bullet hit the trunk. Panicking, I sped up, weaving along the road, hoping to lose him. In the rearview mirror, I saw that the fake officer had gotten behind the wheel of his car and was giving chase. My car was skidding on the wet road, but I tried to keep a firm grip on the wheel. I knew there was a gas station nearby where people might be. When I reached the illuminated area, I slammed on the brakes and ran out of the car, heading for the entrance. Luckily, there was a real police officer there, filling up his car. When he saw me, he immediately pulled out his gun and ordered the officer to stop. The fake tried to run away, but was detained a few seconds later. Already at the station, I learned that this man was wanted for a series of assaults and kidnappings. His arrest was the culmination of a long police operation. That night forever changed my attitude towards trust on the road. Now I always double-check everything before stopping, even if it seems like a legal requirement. My name is Tom, and I am an ordinary man from a small town in Maine. I have a cozy house where I live with my wife Liz and 6-year-old daughter Sarah. Our neighborhood is quiet, surrounded by pine forests, and we always considered it safe. But one winter, our lives changed forever. It was a cold February evening. A blizzard was raging outside, snowflakes settled on the glass, and the world seemed wrapped in an icy blanket. Liz was cooking dinner, Sarah was playing in her room, and I was sitting in the living room with a mug of hot tea, enjoying a rare moment of silence. The TV was on, but I barely paid attention to the news until I heard an alarming message: police warn of a criminal posing as an officer. If he knocks on your door, call 911 immediately. I put the mug down, feeling a little worried, but quickly calmed myself. What bad could happen in a place like this? We live far from the big cities, and our street is one of the quietest. Suddenly there was a loud knock on the door. It wasn't a bell, but a knock, sharp and demanding. I looked at Liz, who stuck her head out of the kitchen. "Who could it be in this cold?" she asked. I stood up and walked to the door, feeling a chill run down my spine. Looking through the peephole, I saw a man in a police uniform. He was wearing a heavy jacket and had a radio over his shoulder. "Good evening, sir, this is the police. We've received a call about suspicious activity in this area. May I come in?" My heart started beating faster. I remembered the warning from the news. "Do you have identification?" I asked, trying to sound firm. He held up his leather wallet, showing a badge. It looked believable, but there was something elusive in his eyes. "Everything okay?" Liz's voice came from behind me. "Yes," I answered, though inside I was seething. I opened the door and the man walked in, shaking snow off his boots. "Thank you," he said, looking around. "Are you home alone?" That question made me even more wary. "No, my family is here," I answered, deciding it was best to tell the truth. He walked slowly into the living room, as if taking in the surroundings. "You say there's been suspicious activity in our neighborhood? What exactly happened?" I asked. "We got a report of an escaped felon in the area," he replied. "I need to check out your house." There was something wrong with his words. He didn't look worried, like a real officer would. I was increasingly getting the feeling that this wasn't who he claimed to be. "Of course," I said, trying to hide my concern. I followed him as he walked through the rooms. When he entered Sarah's room, I felt my body tense. Sarah was sitting on the floor, absorbed in her toy. He lingered there for a few seconds, then left without saying anything. We returned to the living room, and I tried to discreetly take the phone to call the police. But the man noticed my actions. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "Just checking the time," I lied. His gaze became even more wary. At that moment, Liz, who had been in the kitchen, entered the room. She looked at us and immediately felt the tension. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," I answered, trying to look confident. But the next moment, everything changed. The man suddenly pulled a knife out of his inside pocket and pointed it at us. "Sit down," he ordered. Liz gasped and Sarah ran out of her room, hearing her mother scream. I raised my hands, trying to calm him down. "What do you want? Money? Food?" I asked, trying to distract him. "I need you to do what I say," he replied with a predatory smile. I knew I had to act fast. While he was watching Liz, I stepped back to the shelf where the heavy table lamp stood. "Leave my family alone," I said, trying to buy myself time. He laughed. but at that moment I grabbed the lamp and hit his hand hard. The knife fell out and I lunged at him. "Liz, call the police," I screamed. Liz grabbed the phone and I held the man with all my might. He was stronger, but the adrenaline helped me cope with him. At that moment, real police burst through the door. Liz managed to call, and they arrived faster than I expected. The criminal was subdued, and one of the officers approached me. "You did something brave, but it was dangerous," he said. We later learned that this man was wanted for multiple crimes. He used a uniform to break into houses. From that night on, I became more careful. We installed surveillance cameras, and I vowed not to let anyone into the house without first confirming their identity. That winter was a lesson we will never forget. When I was a teenager, my family and I had to move to a suburban area in the eastern United States. Our new house was spacious and cozy, surrounded by woods and quiet neighbors. It seemed like the perfect place to start a new life. However, on the night I will tell you about, the peace of our home was shattered. It happened on a cold November evening. My mother was on a night shift at the hospital, and my father went to a neighboring city on business. I was left alone at home, studying and occasionally distracted by video games. It was approaching midnight when I heard the doorbell ring. This was unexpected. It was rare for someone to come to our place so late. I approached the door and cautiously looked through the peephole. A man in a police uniform, with a badge and a cap, was standing on the porch. My heart sank slightly. Something about his appearance seemed strange to me. His face was slightly shadowed, and his uniform looked a little sloppy. But I decided to open the door. After all, he was a policeman. "Good evening," he said in a deep voice. "I'm Officer Harper with the local police department. We're investigating a series of burglaries in your area. Could you give me a few minutes?" He sounded convincing, but I still felt a little uneasy. "Sure," I answered, opening the door a little wider. "What happened?" He explained that there had been break-ins in a few houses nearby, and he was patrolling the area looking for suspicious individuals. Then he asked a few questions. Did we have security cameras? Had we seen anything unusual? I answered honestly, but I was starting to notice something odd. His eyes wandered around the house behind me, and his questions sounded like he was trying to find out if anyone was home besides me. "Can I come in?" he asked suddenly. "I need to check the backyard to make sure everything is in order." The question made me wary. I remembered that police officers usually didn't enter homes without obvious cause or a warrant. But he seemed so confident and authoritative that I hesitated. Then it hit me. My mother had always told me never to let strangers into the house, even if they looked official. I decided to check his ID. "Excuse me, officer," I said. "Can I see your badge and ID?" His face tightened slightly, but he quickly pulled something out of his pocket and showed me a plastic card. It looked odd, too plain, with blurry letters. I knew something was wrong. "I need to call my parents," I said, taking a step back. "I want to make sure everything is okay." His gaze grew cold, and his voice became harsher. "It won't take long. Open the door wider, or I'll have to call for backup." The situation had clearly become threatening. I quickly closed the door and locked it with all the locks. He started knocking harder, loudly demanding to be let in. I ran to my room to get my phone and dialed 911. The operator listened to me in a calming voice and said that a patrol was on its way. Meanwhile, the man outside became more aggressive. He tried to open the door, and then went to the windows, looking inside. I turned off all the lights in the house and hid in the closet with the phone, waiting for help. Time dragged on endlessly. I heard him muttering something and knocking on the glass. At some point, I heard him break a window in the kitchen. The sound of glass falling to the floor made me go cold. He had entered the house. I heard his heavy steps down the hallway. He was whispering something under his breath, as if enjoying the situation. I tried to breathe as quietly as possible, sitting in the darkness of the closet. Every sound seemed deafening, every moment an eternity. As his footsteps approached, I felt the handle of the closet door slowly turn. At that moment, the siren of a police car outside the window wailed, and I heard the man swear sharply and hurry toward the exit. He barely had time to run out of the house before real police officers arrived. A few minutes later, I heard one of them shout, "Stop! Drop your gun!" There followed the sounds of a struggle. The man was detained, and I was finally able to come out of my hiding place. The real police inspected the house and assured me that everything was under control. They said that such cases are rare, but they do happen. Criminals sometimes pretend to be officers to break into houses. I couldn't sleep well for the next few days. We installed cameras and extra locks. Later, I learned that the man had been arrested in a neighboring area. It turned out that he was connected to several robberies, and his uniform was bought online. This incident taught me a lesson. Even in the most peaceful places, it is important to be vigilant and not trust strangers, no matter how convincing they may seem.